on a storm-choked night in 14th century France. The stone walls of Saint-Pierre Abbey trembled with a sound that was neither prayer nor song but screaming. Beneath the vaulted ceiling of the choir, a nun barefoot, bloodied, and torn by labor brought a child into a world that never meant to see it live. What followed wasn't a baptism, but a ritual of silence. By sunrise, she was gone. No grave, no name, no child, only whispers. Centuries later, visitors claim to hear weeping in Latin beneath the altar, and those who dig find bone. In the remote hills of Occitania, shrouded in morning fog and the toll of distant bells, stood the Abbey of Saint-Pierre, a place where prayers echoed longer than memories, and sins vanished behind walls older than Christendom itself. Here in the mid-14th century, time moved differently. The air was thick with incense and cold, damp stone. Candles guttered in narrow windows, their flames casting long shadows across crumbling frescoes of saints with broken eyes. The women within, daughters of minor nobles, unwanted second-borns, ashamed, and the pious lived by a rhythm older than the dirt beneath their feet. A rhythm of obedience. They rose before the sun, prayed 7 times a day, spoke only when permitted, and spent their lives in a cloister where men did not enter officially, where vows were not only of poverty and chastity, but of silence. The rule of Saint Benedict governed every gesture. Laughter was discouraged. Touch was suspect. A look could invite suspicion. A secret could mean damnation. Behind the heavy oak doors of the convent's inner sanctum, a woman's body was not her on it, belonged to God, to the abbess, and to the walls that knew everything, but said nothing. And yet, whispers always found cracks. They spoke of Father August, the confessor whose gaze lingered too long, about the guardsman with a hidden key, of a noble family's secret one so shameful they bought their daughter's silence with bricks and prayer. It was within these rotted rituals and hallowed hypocrisies that our nun, her real name scrubbed from history, was buried before she ever died. She entered the convent as a girl, perhaps 13, with the same solemn vows and shaved crown as the others. But unlike the others, her story would not end in prayer. It would end beneath the altar, in mortar and shadow. And it would begin with a heartbeat. It was during a teens, the coldest of the night prayers, that the first scream tore through the stillness. Not a hymn, not a chant. A scream, raw and human, rupturing the holy air between the pillars of St. Pierre's dim chapel. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings, bounced down the nave, and froze the kneeling nuns in place. Their lips kept moving in prayer, but their eyes darted toward the sound, toward the choir stalls where Sister Marguerite had collapsed. Her habit was soaked in sweat. Blood darkened the hem, and beneath her white-knuckled hands, trembling and clawed, her belly had begun to ripple. It should have been impossible. No man was allowed within these walls. No woman could conceive without sin. And yet, the proof screamed again, louder than the last. The abbess, pale and grim, stood motionless, but the others knew. Some stared in disbelief. Some wept. Others looked away, not in mercy, but in fear, because to witness was to be implicated. And in the convent, knowledge was as dangerous as desire. The baby came quickly, too quickly. Perhaps it was premature. Perhaps it wasn't the first. No one dared to speak. The infant hit the cold floor with a wet thud. Sister Marguerite reached for it with shaking fingers, only to be dragged away before she could touch her child's skin. 2 novices locked arms around her, smothering her cries in the folds of their sleeves. The child's cry never came. Some say the beasts ordered its silence then and there. Others whisper that the child was stillborn and that the real punishment was not for the child's life, but for what that life revealed. The choir was emptied by sunrise. Blood was scrubbed from the stones. Incense was burned until it choked the air. And by vespers that evening, Sister Marguerite was gone. There would be no excommunication, no trial, no penance, only a new stone added beneath the altar, one that pulsed with warmth for days. The altar was the heart of the abbey, the sacred table where the bloodless sacrifice was offered. Her hands trembled over chalices, and Latin psalms curled like smoke toward heaven. And beneath it, they buried her, not in a coffin, not in sanctified shrouds, but in the earth itself, stone by stone, layer by layer, sealed beneath the marble she once knelt before. There was no funeral, no final prayer. It's only silence, thick, humid, and unnatural. It's a kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, the kind that feels like it's hiding something. The other nuns watched in a kind of religious trance as Masons worked through the night. They did not speak, they did not sing. They watched a sister disappear into the floor like a sin being paved over. No records were kept, her name was scratched from the rolls, her room was cleared by morning. All that remained was a strange heat. Near the altar, where candles melted faster than they should, where shadows lingered longer than expected, where some whispered, a sound could be heard beneath the chance's soft, echoing weep, like the wind moving through hollow stone. But no one dared dig, because the scandal wasn't just that a nun had broken her vows. The scandal was that someone had entered the convent, or perhaps never left it. Rumors spread. Was it a priest? A bishop? One of the nobles who funded the abbey? Or worse, had it been one of their own? Some sisters began to confess to visions Marguerite's face in the candle flame, her voice behind the wall. One novice claimed she heard her singing hymns in Latin from beneath the stone. In a voice too pure to be of this world, she was sent away. The convent moved on. But the altar, they say, never cooled, and neither did the guilt buried beneath it. Before the blood, before the silence, there was longing. Marguerite was never meant to be a nun. She was born to a minor noble house in Provence. She was the third daughter of political inconvenience in a world where only sons had purpose and only firstborn. Daughters earned dowries. Her family's solution was typical for the 14th century. Veil her, lock her behind convent walls. Call it piety. She arrived at the abbey at age 15, her eyes too bright, her questions too bold. They shaved her head, they replaced silk with wool. But they could not erase the fire behind her prayers. She obeyed, at least outwardly, but something in her never fully bent. She was quiet, but watchful, pious, but searching. She read scripture. Yes, but also poetry. She fasted, but not out of devotion. She wanted to feel something. And then he arrived, a traveling priest. Young, too young. Sent from Avignon with a forged letter of holy authority. No one questioned it, not then. He was handsome and dangerous. And Marguerite saw that before anyone else did. They began with confession, then glances, then ... the unspoken. He began spending more time at the abbey, more than necessary. And the sisters said nothing. Either they didn't see or didn't want to. Desire in a convent doesn't look like sin. It looks like light in the eyes. They met in the crypt first, then the garden. Then, finally, the choir place meant for worship. It's turned into a sanctuary of flesh. She was 17 when it happened. A quickening in her body. A change in the shape of her robes. She hid it, bound herself, prayed harder, cried in silence. And one night during Vespers, incense choked the air and Latin chanted off ancient stone. Her water broke. The other sisters turned to her. She screamed, not just from pain, but from knowing exactly what was about to be taken from her. The choir was never meant to echo with that kind of sound. A chapel's architecture is sacred geometry designed for hymns, whispers of prayer, echoes of organ breath. But on that cursed evening, what rose from the stones was not song, but screaming, raw, human. Sister Marguerite collapsed near the altar, clutching the wooden pews, her face twisted in agony. Blood stained her habit. Water pooled beneath her knees. And when the other sisters rushed forward, it wasn't to help, it was to witness. Because what they saw in that moment was not a woman in pain, but a betrayal incarnate. Vow broken. A womb that should have been empty. Swelling with sin, her priest, was nowhere to be found. No one called for a doctor, no midwife entered the cloister. Only the abbess, cold-eyed and unmoved, stood before the suffering girl, her hands clasped like a judge presiding over an execution. "You will not cry out again," the abbess said. "You will not blaspheme this place with your filth." Marguerite tried to speak, tried to explain. But her mouth was full of screams, her hands slick with blood, her child halfway between this world and the next. She bit her own lip until It bled just to muffle the agony. Hours passed, the child was born. A boy, but no records were kept. No baptism, no name. No cradle. Only silence, and then, just as her body gave way to unconsciousness, she felt the rough scrape of stone beneath her spine. They were moving her, dragging her, toward the altar. That's when Marguerite realized she would never leave the chapel, not alive, not with her child, and certainly not as a th woman forgiven. They didn't wait for her to die. They wrapped the newborn in linen, not to swaddle him but to silence him. His cries, thin and frantic, were muffled beneath cloth and judgment. Marguerite, half conscious, could barely raise her arms as the abbess gave the order. The altar stone floor lifted like a tomb, unsealing in reverse. This wasn't just a chapel. It was a fortress of secrets. Beneath the altar narrow cavity, barely wide enough for a body, they dragged her in first, still bleeding, barely breathing. Her fingers clawed against the earth. She begged not for mercy but for her child. They placed the baby beside her, on her chest, still squirming. Her arms, weak and trembling, closed around him instinctively. Then came the bricks, one by one, methodical. Final, the last thing she saw through the narrowing crack above. Her head was the abbess's face, unblinking, unforgiving, and then darkness. Some say she lasted 3 days, that they could hear her muffled cries in the early mornings, especially when the bells rang for Mass. Others claimed they heard a baby wailing, echoing under the stone as incense filled the air above. The church recorded: number death, no birth. Only a scandal that had been erased. Yet strange things began to happen. Visitors would find blood at the edge of the altar. Steps never much. It's just enough to unsettle. A novice nun went mad after saying she saw a pale woman weeping in the sanctuary, singing in Latin with an infant in her arms. And in the dead of night, the choir echoed with a lullaby no one claimed to know. Requiem aeterne. No, ... Donna, eyes, Domini. The Abbey of Saint-Lys never quite recovered, though the building still stood. Its foundations felt ... disturbed, as if beneath the polished marble and gilded arches, something refused to stay buried. It began with whispers low, fragmented voices. During Vespers, Latin phrases that didn't match the hymns. Breathless sobs heard in empty chapels. And always from near the altar. The senior sisters blamed fatigue, overzealous imagination, the devil even. But the novices knew better. One girl claimed that as she cleaned the altar alone, the stone floor had grown warm pulsing, almost as if breathing beneath her. Another dropped a censer mid-mass when she heard what she swore was a lullaby, faint, feminine, and echoing from underfoot. No one could find a source. The silence that followed was worse than sound. Fear began to take root like mold in the walls. The once sacred air now hung heavy, stale, as if it remembered every breath Marguerite had gasped beneath it. The abbess grew harsh, paranoid. She enforced silence during prayer so severely that one girl bit through her tongue, trying not to scream. Records from that time became ... evasive. Mentions of a disciplinary incident appear in the Abbey's chronicles, written in a different hand, sealed in wax. One entry quickly crossed out simply reads, "The altar is no longer hollow." And still. The music came, soft, mournful, sung in perfect Latin. No source, no singer, just a ghost refusing to be forgotten. The people of the nearby village stopped attending Mass. Some claimed the church smelled of blood on feast days. Others whispered that the communion wine tasted like salt-like tears. Children dared one another to touch the altar, then ran screaming at the faint sound of crying. Marguerite had been denied a name in her burial, so the church tried to erase her. But the stones remembered by the time word reached Avignon. The abbey's reputation had begun to sour like spoiled incense. Rome was uneasy. A haunted altar. Whispered miracles tainted by the screams of scandal. The church thrived on control, not mystery, and certainly not the kind that stirred sympathy for a disgraced nun. So they buried it again. Not just the bones, but the entire. Truth, an envoy, was dispatched under papal seal. He arrived with no procession, no announcement. Just 3 men in black carrying shovels and a satchel of blessed salt. The sisters were told to fast for 3 days. No speaking, no questions. When they returned to the sanctuary, the altar was different new marble, clean lines, no plaque, no inscription. Only those who had seen it before could tell it was colder than before. As if nothing could warm the stone again. Marguerite's name was purged from the records. Her novice registration disappeared. Her baptismal certificate was burned. Even her family in Toulouse reported being questioned into forgetting her existence. It was as if she had never been born, never sung, never bled beneath sacred ceilings. Only the ghost remained. The Vatican issued no formal statement, but whispers from within the Curia leaked out. Some believed Marguerite had been possessed. Others claimed she had consorted with her confessor. One wild tale insisted the child had been fathered by a bishop, and that the haunting was punishment for apostolic blasphemy. But none of it could be proven, because proof was the enemy of forgetting. In the following years, dozens of abbeys quietly demolished their altars and rebuilt them just in case. Others sealed basements, bricked up crypts, burned old confessionals. They called it routine maintenance. But it was a silent purge, one meant to erase what the church could not explain and would not atone for. Yet still, the hymns were heard softly, faintly, on windless days. A Latin lullaby for a child who never cried, sung by a mother who wasn't allowed to scream. They say the voice returned first, not loud, not shrieking. Just a faint, mournful hymnoese in Latin, always beneath the altar. Visitors to the abbey reported hearing it during quiet prayer. A melody with no known origin, echoing through the stones as if the building itself remembered her. Choir novices began waking with the same phrase etched into their dreams. Salve me, Mater Dei. Save me, Mother of God. Then came the sightings. Figure in white, barefoot robes soaked red at the hem, moving silently through the shadows of the cloister. Some claimed to see her kneeling beneath the altar. Others saw her walking along the abbey wall, carrying a bundle in her arms, a bundle that never cried, never stirred. One priest, driven by guilt or faith, tore fear up in the floor beneath the altar, again in secret. What he found was not just bone. It was a cavity stained with blood that had never dried. Embedded in the stone, scorched into the sacred rock, was the outline of a screaming mouth. He fled the next day, was never seen again. The church, once more, denied everything. Ghost stories, they said. Superstition, a test of faith for the weak. But behind closed doors, bishops in black began whispering the phrase, "The nun in the choir." No name, no record, just the title. A warning passed in silence among those who had seen too much. Over the centuries, the abbey decayed. The altar cracked. The original choir loft collapsed in a storm. Yet no one dared build atop the space again, because those who did, builders, caretakers, even curious pilgrims, reported the same dream. Every time, the voice of a woman whispering in Latin, holding her child and asking one thing, "Will you sing with me?" And those who said yes, they never woke up. Centuries have passed. Stone has crumbled. Records have vanished. But the abbey still stands silent, heavy with the weight of things no scripture ever mentions. They buried her under the altar, hoping the sacred would silence the scandal, hoping stone could muffle screams, hoping a woman's ruin could be hidden in holy ground. But history doesn't forget cruelty. It remembers it in whispers. She wasn't the first nun punished for a sin she didn't commit. She wouldn't be the last. Her body became the lesson. Her silence became the sermon. And still, in the quietest moments of night, the choir sometimes sings a note too low for human breath. A note that seems to come from beneath the floor. Because the true horror wasn't that she died screaming. It's that no one ever confessed. Have you ever heard of a darker fate than this? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Was she a sinner or a sacrifice? And if these forbidden stories of power, punishment, and buried truths haunt you too, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more history that was never meant to be remembered. I'll see you in the next story. Or maybe you'll hear me sing.